Christmas morning, I found out my wife had been lying to me for 15 years. Not about another man in her bed, but one buried 6 feet under the snow. And the day I followed her into that frozen graveyard was the day my marriage and my life ended. My name's Denis Mallory, and this is not just a story about love. It's about guilt, betrayal, and the kind of truth that doesn't set you free, it destroys you first. If you're hearing my voice right now, do me one favor, like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because I need to know how far the story of my revenge has traveled. And maybe, just maybe, by the time I finish telling you everything, you'll understand why forgiveness was the hardest kind of revenge I could ever choose. The first time she vanished, it was Christmas morning. The 15th time she did it, I finally realized something was very, very wrong. For 15 years, every Christmas morning at exactly 8:15, my wife Margaret would disappear. She'd leave the house wearing the same gray wool coat, with the frayed cuffs, the red scarf I bought her our first winter together, and that small leather satchel she never let out of her sight. She'd smile too easily, too perfectly, and say, "Just a few errands before lunch, honey." And then she was gone. 3 hours, always 3 hours, never late, never early. No one in town ever saw her, and she never spoke about where she'd gone. You'd think a man would start asking questions. But I didn't. Not for a long time. I used to tell myself marriage meant trust. That love meant giving someone the space to breathe, even if it meant sitting alone with your doubts. And in those years I had plenty of doubts. Small ones at first, then heavy ones that settled in my chest like stones I couldn't spit out. Our house sits on the edge of Lake Frost in Vermont. You can see the water from the kitchen window, frozen solid this time of year, a mirror reflecting nothing but white sky. The mornings here are quiet, too quiet sometimes. I'd sit by that same window with a mug of hot coffee, watching snowflakes gather on the railing, listening to the creak of the wood stove. And every Christmas morning, I'd watch her car pull out of the driveway and vanish down the road. 15 winters, 15 cups of coffee, 15 times pretending not to notice. She'd come back around noon, her cheeks red, her hands ice cold, her eyes, well, they always looked like she'd been crying. But when I asked, she'd laugh softly and say, "Oh, the wind was brutal today." And I'd nod, even though I knew the wind can sting your face, sure, but it can't make your eyes look that empty. Margaret was good at pretending. Maybe I was better at believing. There's something about Christmas that makes lies taste sweeter. The smell of cinnamon rolls, the sound of Nat King Cole on the radio, the tree lights flickering against the frost. It's easy to let the warmth fool you. Easy to tell yourself everything's fine because the world outside is beautiful. But beauty can be a mask. And Margaret wore it well. Each year, the routine stayed the same. She'd wake up before dawn, humming to herself, moving quietly through the house. I'd wake to the smell of fresh coffee and the faint rustle of wrapping paper. She always made breakfast: pancakes, bacon, a soft-boiled egg, and kissed my cheek before she left. That kiss was her alibi. A perfect performance of love before the curtain dropped. The first few years I told myself she was out buying last-minute gifts. But who buys gifts on Christmas morning when every store's closed? Then I thought, maybe she visits a friend, someone lonely, someone who needs her. That's the kind of woman she was, kind, selfless, always putting others first. But kindness doesn't explain secrets. One year she came home with dirt on the hem of her coat. Another year her gloves were damp, as if she'd been kneeling in snow. Once she forgot her scarf, and when she returned, her neck was bare red from the cold, her lips trembling, like she'd seen something that broke her. Still, I never asked. People like to say love makes you blind. That's not true. Love makes you see everything and forgive it anyway. I knew something was off. I felt it in the way she looked at me during dinner, like she was studying my face to make sure I hadn't noticed the distance growing between us. Like she was praying I'd stay blind just a little longer. The strange thing is, I didn't resent her for it. Not at first. I pitied her. Whatever it was, she carried each Christmas morning. I could tell it weighed her down. Some days, she'd stare at the fire for hours, her reflection trembling in the glass door of the wood stove. I used to think she was lost in thought. Now I know she was lost in memory. Our friends used to envy us. 15 years and you two still act like newlyweds, they'd say at dinner parties. And Margaret would smile that easy smile, the one that made people believe in forever. I'd smile too, because it was easier than explaining the truth. Forever feels long, when you're the only one living in it. There was one Christmas Eve, when she stayed up past midnight wrapping presents. I woke to find her crying quietly in the dark. She said it was nothing, just tired. I didn't press her. I never pressed her. But last December, something changed. Maybe it was the way she flinched when I mentioned driving together to visit my sister that morning. Maybe it was how she burned the pancakes, something she never did, and stared at the blackened pan, like it reminded her of something far away. Or maybe it was just the way her smile looked forced, like she'd practiced it too many times. 15 years of the same lie can wear even the best actress down. That morning, the snow came early, thick, wet, heavy. The roads were almost buried. Margaret looked out the window and said softly, "Guess I'll have to drive slow today." I remember staring at her reflection in the glass. The way the gray light hit her face, she looked older, tired but peaceful, like a woman already halfway gone. I wanted to ask her then. I wanted to grab her hand, tell her I knew something was wrong, beg her to stop disappearing. But I didn't. I just watched as she put on that same gray coat, looped the red scarf around her neck, and picked up her little brown bag. She kissed me on the cheek, smiled like she always did, and whispered, "I'll be back before lunch." Then she walked out into the falling snow. I stood by the window, coffee steaming in my hand, and watched her car roll down the drive until the white swallowed it whole. The house was so quiet, I could hear my heartbeat echo through it. And for the first time in 15 years, I didn't sit back down. I put on my coat, grabbed my truck keys, and stepped into the cold. That last Christmas morning, I decided to follow her. And that decision changed the rest of my life. I remember the sound of my boots on the porch that morning, slow, deliberate, like I was walking toward something I couldn't undo. The air cut through me sharp as glass. Snow was coming down heavy, the kind that eats sound, turning the world into a white silence. Her tire tracks stretched down the driveway, already half buried by the storm. I got into my truck and started the engine. The heater coughed, the radio flickered to life with a soft hum of Christmas songs, and I turned it off immediately. Joy felt wrong. I saw her taillights about a half-mile ahead, faint red glows moving through the fog. I kept my distance. It wasn't hard, the roads were empty. No one was foolish enough to drive in that kind of weather. But Margaret was. And so was I. The town looked different, under the snow, like a photograph of itself. I passed Main Street, the diner where we used to eat pie on Sunday nights, the post office, the old clock tower that hadn't worked in 10 years. Every place we had ever been together blurred past me like memories I didn't want to keep. She turned left at the intersection, by the church, heading out toward the industrial park. My stomach tightened. That part of town had been dead for years, abandoned warehouses, rusting fences, forgotten lots, filled with snowdrifts and silence. Why would she go there? For the first few miles, I told myself she was meeting someone. It's strange how fast your mind turns cruel when it's scared. Every possible image of betrayal flashed before me, her hand in someone else's, her laugh, her voice whispering to another man. I'd seen it happen to other men my age, wives getting restless, Finding companionship in old flames or younger faces is. I used to think Margaret was different. Now I wasn't sure. Maybe I was to blame. When I lost my job at the bank 5 years ago, I told her it was temporary. But temporary turned into months, then years. My heart problems didn't help mild arrhythmia, they said. The kind that keeps you alive, but makes you feel like death's always nearby. I stopped hiking, stopped going out, stopped being the man she married. Maybe she wanted more than the tired, medicated version of me. Maybe she deserved it. I followed her past the last gas station on the edge of town. The snow was thicker now, swirling in sheets across the road. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel. My wipers squeaked a desperate rhythm. The road narrowed, houses gave way to fields. Then the factories appeared, dark shapes, behind layers of ice and fog. She drove past them, not slowing once. That's when Frank's voice came back to me. Frank Reynolds, the town sheriff. We'd been friends since high school, played baseball together, dated the same girls, grew old in the same small town. A few weeks earlier, I'd run into him at the hardware store. He was buying road salt. I was pretending to need something I didn't. He had looked at me with that half-grin cops get when they already know too much. "She's hiding something, pal," he'd said, dropping the bag of salt into his cart. "People don't vanish every Christmas for nothing." I'd laughed it off then. "You watch too much TV, Frank." But his words stuck like splinters under my skin. And now, watching her car glide deeper into the white, I realized he might have been right all along. She drove another 10 minutes beyond the last streetlight. I'd never followed this road before. It was lined with pine trees, heavy with snow, their branches drooping low, forming a tunnel of darkness. Margaret slowed down for the first time. I turned off my headlights, let the truck roll in silence, keeping far enough behind to be unseen. My pulse thudded in my ears, steady, but uneasy like a warning drum. She passed a sign that barely poked through the snow. "Private property, no trespassing." That was when fear hit me. Not the kind that makes you stop, but the kind that pushes you forward, because turning back feels worse. She pulled into a narrow dirt lane almost hidden by trees. The car's red taillights glowed faintly through the snowfall. For a moment, they hung there like two dying stars. Then her engine went quiet. I stopped at the mouth of the lane and killed my lights. The silence that followed was absolute. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, my breath fogging up the windshield. My truck's heater wheezed like an old man. I could feel the heat of my coffee thermos against my thigh, but inside, I was ice. There's a point in every mutt's life when he knows the truth is coming for him, whether he's ready or not. Sitting there in the dark, watching that faint red glow vanish through the trees, I felt it breathing down my neck. I opened the door and stepped out. The snow swallowed the sound instantly. The cold hit me like a slap. My breath came out in white clouds. I shoved my hands into my pockets and started walking toward where she'd gone. The path was narrow, almost invisible, flanked by trees, whose branches clawed at my jacket as I passed. The snow reached my knees, heavy and wet, pulling at my legs. Every step sounded like paper tearing in half. I followed the faint trail her tires had left until it disappeared under fresh snowfall. Ahead, through the gray curtain of the storm, I could just make out her car, parked beside what looked like a chain-link fence. Beyond it, nothing but darkness and the vague outline of something, buildings maybe, or graves of trees. I stopped. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. All those years of silence, of pretending not to see, had led me here to a forgotten road outside a forgotten town, chasing a truth I wasn't sure I wanted. If she turned around right then and saw me, what would I even say? "Hey honey, just thought I'd follow you into the middle of nowhere in a blizzard." No. I couldn't speak. Not yet. I crouched behind a snow-covered mailbox that leaned sideways, half buried in ice. The metal was rusted, the name long faded. She stepped out of her car. Just then, her gray coat stark against the white scarf, bright red, like a streak of blood on snow. She looked smaller somehow, fragile. She took something from the passenger seat, tucked it into her bag, and started walking toward the gate. I froze. She didn't look around, didn't hesitate, just pushed open the fence, the hinges creaking like an old wound. And then she vanished beyond it. The world around me was nothing but white and wind, the air thick enough to choke on. My legs ached. My chest throbbed, but I kept moving step by step until the fence loomed in front of me. Beyond it lay a stretch of land covered in snow, fenced off, empty, or so I thought. But as the wind shifted, I caught sight of something black, cutting through the white, a row of iron bars curving into an arch. A gate. A name I couldn't yet read carved into the metal. I swallowed hard. My breath fogged up the air in front of me. Whatever waited beyond that gate, it wasn't going to be simple. It wasn't going to be kind. And yet I couldn't stop. I pushed through the snow until it reached my knees. The cold burned my skin, but I barely felt it. My focus narrowed to one thought, one fear, one need. I had to know. Because after 15 years of pretending, I couldn't live with the questions anymore. The gate groaned when I pushed it. That sound, old metal straining against years of neglect, cut through the stillness like a scream muffled by snow. I slipped inside, careful, slow. The air felt different beyond the fence, heavier somehow, like it remembered things the living tried to forget. The place was a cemetery. Not the kind you visit with flowers and prayers. This one had been forgotten by time itself. The headstones leaned like drunks, names half erased by weather. The trees bowed low, their branches heavy with snow, as if the whole forest was kneeling. Every sound was swallowed by the storm. Only the wind whispered through broken iron fences and white marble. Margaret's footprints led deeper in, weaving between rows of graves. I followed at a distance, heart pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. She stopped at a headstone near the far end of the lot, a single figure of gray against endless white. I ducked behind a maple tree, my breath fogging the air. She knelt. From where I stood, I could see the tremor in her shoulders. Her scarf, red sharp against the snow, fluttered as the wind picked up. She pulled a bouquet from her bag, white roses carefully wrapped in paper. Not store-bought. Hand-tied. Fresh. I knew those roses. I'd seen them before 15 years ago on our wedding day. The same white roses Margaret had chosen for our table arrangements. She said they meant purity. Hope. A new beginning. But seeing them now in her gloved hands, they looked like a funeral offering. She placed them gently at the base of the headstone, then bowed her head. For a moment, she didn't move. Then her hand rose and brushed the snow from the stone. She traced her fingers over the engraved name. I couldn't see it clearly at first, but when she stepped aside, the letters came into focus. Michael Grayson, born 1980, died December 24, 2007. My breath caught. That name, it jolted something buried deep in my memory. Michael Grayson. I'd heard it once years ago, before Margaret and I were married. She mentioned it just once off on Aikido while talking about her old life. I didn't ask then. People have pasts. I didn't think it mattered. But it mattered now. My eyes drifted lower to the small bronze plaque attached to the base of the stone. The words, dulled by time, still legible. Killed in Highway 40 accident. I froze. Highway 40. That was the same road Margaret said her mother had been in a crash on the same night before our wedding, when she disappeared for hours and returned shaken, saying only, "There was an accident. I had to help." 15 years. One story. One lie. The wind howled through the trees, and my knees nearly gave way. I pressed my hand against the rough bark of the tree to steady myself. My chest burned. Margaret stayed kneeling, unmoving, her gloved fingers resting on the stone, like she was touching a person, not a memory. Her lips moved slow and trembling. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I could read the grief in every movement of her body, the kind of grief that doesn't fade, only hides. She was crying now. The sound carried faintly through the wind, a soft broken rhythm, not loud enough for the dead, but too much for the living. I'd never seen her cry like that, not even when her father died. For years I thought she was strong. Now I realized she was simply carrying something too heavy to show. She stayed there for what felt like forever, whispering into the cold. Then she reached into her bag again and pulled out something else, a small picture frame. She brushed the snow off it and held it against the stone. Even from where I stood, I recognized the photo. It was a wedding picture, but not ours. The man beside her, Michael, was younger than I remembered Margaret describing him. His smile had the easy confidence of someone who thought tomorrow was guaranteed. She touched the glass, tracing his face with her fingers, her head bowed so low, I thought she might collapse. My stomach twisted. The snow bit into my face, but I barely felt it. My whole body had gone numb. I wanted to run to her, to pull her away, to demand an explanation, but some part of me knew I didn't belong there. That moment wasn't mine. It never had been. Margaret wasn't visiting a stranger. She was visiting the man she truly loved. All those Christmas mornings, all those 3-hour disappearances, they weren't errands or charity visits. They were confessions, pilgrimages. And I had been the fool waiting at the window, holding a coffee mug, thinking love was trust. The snow thickened, falling harder now, swallowing her silhouette in white. She stayed on her knees, unmoving, her hands clasped like prayer. I couldn't look away. My heart pounded, each beat echoing with realization. 15 years ago, the night before our wedding, she said she'd been helping her injured mother on Highway 14. But her mother hadn't even left town that week. I remember calling the hospital afterward. No record, no mention. I let it go. I told myself memory plays tricks. But there it was, carved in stone, killed in Highway 14 accident. She'd lied. She'd lied for 15 years. And maybe not just to me. A sudden gust of wind blew the paper around the bouquet. The white roses lifted slightly, and I saw what was underneath, a ribbon, tied around the stems, silver and frayed at the edges. I knew that ribbon. It was from our wedding day, the same one she'd wrapped around her bouquet, as she walked down the aisle toward me. My legs went weak. 15 years. 15 Christmas mornings. She hadn't just been visiting a grave, she'd been visiting their anniversary. The truth hit like a knife, turning in slow motion. Every kiss, every smile, every "I love you" suddenly felt rehearsed lines from a life she was pretending to live. I thought we were building something together, but she'd already built it once with him, and I was living in the shadow of what she lost. The snow was coming down so hard now, I could barely see her, just a blur of gray and red, moving against the white. She touched the headstone one last time, her palm flat against Michael's name. Then she whispered something I couldn't hear, placed the frame upright against the grave, and stood. For a moment, she just stood there staring at the stone, as if waiting for it to answer. Then she turned, adjusted her scarf, and walked back toward her car. I ducked behind the tree again, pressing myself against the bark. She passed within 20 feet of me, her boots crunching the snow, her face pale and empty. She didn't see me. When her car door shut and the engine started, the sound was distant, muffled, swallowed by the storm. Her taillights disappeared into the white until nothing was left but silence. I stepped out from behind the tree. My body felt heavy, my chest tight. I walked to the grave, following her fading footprints until they vanished under the falling snow. The bouquet she'd left was already dusted in white. I crouched, brushed away the snow, and stared at the silver ribbon again. My fingers trembled as I touched it. The cold bit into my skin, but I didn't care. I just needed to feel something real, something that wasn't a lie. Michael Grayson. Highway 40, December 23, 2007. I whispered the date under my breath, like a curse, like a prayer. That was the night before our wedding. The night she vanished. And that was the night she stopped belonging to me, if she ever had at all. The truth settled over me heavier than the snow. For 15 years I'd been married to a ghost. By the time I pulled back into the driveway, the storm had thickened. The snow came sideways fast, wild, slapping against the windshield like it wanted me gone. I sat there in the truck for a long while, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. The house glowed faintly through the white haze, warm lights wreathed on the door, smoke curling from the chimney. From the outside it looked peaceful, the kind of peace that hides the worst kinds of truth. I wiped my hands over my face, trying to calm the tremor in them. My pulse hadn't slowed since the cemetery. It still beat hard against my ribs, every thud echoing that name carved into stone. Michael Grayson. Her secret. Her ghost. I stepped out of the truck, the cold slapping me clean across the face, and walked up to the porch. Inside, the air was thick with cinnamon and roast, the scent of Christmas, the smell of habit. I hung up my coat and tried to breathe normal again, tried to let the rhythm of home calm me down. Margaret wasn't back yet. Her coffee cup still sat on the counter, half-drunk, lipstick mark fading on the rim. The radio hummed low, Bing Crosby singing "I'll Be Home for Christmas." The irony was almost unbearable. I sat at the table staring at the empty chair across from me, the one she'd left an hour ago. My fingers tapped the wood unconsciously. I kept seeing her at the grave, the way her hand trembled against his name, the way she'd whispered something so soft. Even the wind seemed to hush for it. I tried to picture how I'd look at her when she came home. Would I ask? Would I confront her? Or would I pretend one more time that I didn't know? The front door opened before I could decide. Margaret stepped in, brushing snow from her coat. She didn't see me at first. She was too busy steadying herself against the doorframe, her breath coming short, uneven. When she finally looked up, our eyes met. Her cheeks were flushed, her lashes wet, and her hands were shaking. "You're home early," she said, voice careful, almost rehearsed. "So are you," I replied. She smiled, small, nervous. Roads were rough. I slipped near the market. She held up one gloved hand, dirt smudged across the fingers. There was a streak of mud near the hem of her coat, too. I stared at it, the exact color of the earth I'd seen by the grave. "The market," I repeated quietly. "That must have been some fall." She looked at me for a moment, just a flicker, quick searching, then turned away, hanging her coat on the rack. "I'm fine," she said. "Nothing broken." I smiled, or at least I tried to. My mouth moved, but it didn't feel like me. Inside I was shaking too, but not from the cold. She moved through the house like nothing was wrong, like we were still the couple people envied. The kettle whistled. She poured water, humming softly under her breath. I watched her every motion, every pause, every twitch, every silence. The sound of tires crunching outside made both of us glance toward the window. Headlights swept across the room. "She's here," Margaret said, her voice lifting with something that almost sounded like relief. "Emily, Margaret's daughter from her first marriage. 27 now, sharp, confident, too smart for her own good. She'd driven up from Boston to spend Christmas with us. It had been years since we'd all sat under the same roof." Emily came in, with the kind of energy the house hadn't felt in a long time. Snow in her hair, grin too wide, scarf half undone. She dropped her bags, hugged her mother first, then turned to me. "Hey, old man," she said, smiling. "You look like you've seen a ghost." For a second, I almost laughed. "Almost. Just tired," I said. "Long morning." She narrowed her eyes a little. She always had her mother's intuition, that sharpness that cut through pleasantries. You okay, Dennis? I nodded. Yeah, fine. But she didn't buy it, I could tell. Emily had a way of studying people like a lawyer, prepping for trial reading, faces catching lies. Her gaze flicked between me and her mother, then back again. Margaret busied herself with the oven. Dinner'll be ready soon, she said too quickly. Why don't you get settled, sweetheart? Emily lingered for a second longer, then finally took her coat upstairs. When she was gone, the silence fell again heavy and thick. I stood near the window watching snow gather against the glass. Margaret moved around the kitchen chopping, stirring, anything to keep her hands busy. I wanted to speak, to tear the silence open, but the words caught somewhere deep in my throat. Instead, I waited. Dinner passed like a play we both knew by heart. Emily talked about her cases in Boston, divorces, custody battles, money ruining love. I half listened, half watched Margaret, who smiled and nodded in all the right places but barely touched her food. When we finished eating, Emily offered to clear the table. Margaret stood beside her collecting plates. I sat back pretending to sip my wine, my mind still turning over the grave, the flowers, the name. Then it happened. Margaret leaned forward to grab a dish, and something slipped from the collar of her sweater, a thin silver chain. It swung just enough for the pendant to catch the light from the chandelier. I froze. It wasn't a pendant. It was a ring. A man's ring. It hung from the chain like a secret begging to be seen. I felt the air leave my lungs. My hand tightened around the glass until it creaked. Margaret noticed a second later. She reached up quickly, tucking the chain back beneath her sweater, but not before I saw it. Not before my eyes caught the engraving, etched faintly inside the band. Michael. The room blurred for a moment, the clatter of dishes, the hum of the heater, Emily's voice fading to nothing. Margaret turned toward me, then trying to smile, but her eyes gave her away. She knew what I'd seen. I knew what it meant. I didn't say a word. Didn't have to. The silence between us said everything. 15 years of lies, 15 years of pretending. And across the table Emily looked from her mother to me, her brow furrowed, the question forming on her lips before she even knew what it was. But I couldn't face either of them. Not yet. Because the truth wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. Christmas Eve. The house looked picture perfect from the outside lights, strung along the porch, a wreath on the door, snow falling like a postcard come to life. But inside, it felt hollow, like the echo of a place that used to mean something. Margaret was sitting by the fire wrapping gifts. The glow from the flames flickered across her face, sweet and warm, but her eyes were distant. Emily had gone to bed early after too much wine and too many awkward silence. I'd been sitting across from her for over an hour, pretending to read the paper. I wasn't reading anything. My mind was burning holes in itself. The image of that ring, Michael's ring, swung in my head like a pendulum that wouldn't stop. The grave, the flowers, the lies, it all twisted together until I couldn't breathe. I folded the paper, set it on the table, and looked straight at her. Who's Michael? The question came out quieter than I expected, but it hit the air like a bullet. Margaret feces. Her hands went still, scissors halfway through a ribbon. For a long moment, she didn't even look up. The fire popped, the only sound between us. Then she said, barely above a whisper, "Denise, please don't. Don't." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Don't ask about the man whose name is hanging around your neck, the man you've been visiting every Christmas for 15 years. Her lips trembled. The scissors slipped from her hand, clattering against the hardwood floor. "I can explain," she said, but her voice cracked on the word explain. I leaned forward. "Then do it. Because I followed you this morning, Margaret. I saw you at that grave. I saw his knee, Michael Grayson, and I saw the flowers, the same damn roses from our wedding. Her shoulders shook, but she said nothing. Was he your lover? I asked, my throat dry. Before me. She looked up. Finally, eyes red, tears sliding down her cheeks. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I snapped. You've lied every Christmas morning for 15 years, Margaret, in 15. You think I didn't notice the way you come home? Hollow eyes, red hands shaking. I thought you were buying gifts, visiting friends. I thought you were just tired. But it wasn't, that was it. You were going to him. Please, she whispered. You don't understand. I understand more than you think. I slammed my hand on the table, and the coffee cup rattled. You were never mine. You married me. But your heart stayed buried with him. Her sobs broke the quiet, small and raw like a child's. Upstairs a floor creaked. Emily appeared at the bottom of the stairs in her robe, eyes wide, voice groggy. What's going on? Go back to bed, Emily, Margaret said quickly, wiping her eyes. No, Emily said, stepping closer. I heard yelling. Mom, what is he talking about? I looked at her, that young, sharp face that reminded me of Margaret when we first met. Ask your mother, I said bitterly. Ask her where she's been every Christmas morning since before you graduated law school. Ask her why she wears another man's ring. Emily turned to her mother, confused. Mom? Margaret covered her face with both hands, shaking. Please, Denise, stop. Answer me, I shouted. Enough, Emily snapped, stepping between us. Don't talk to her like that. She's been lying to both of us, I said, voice cracking under its own weight. She's my mother, Emily said coldly. And you're out of line. That did it. The anger I'd been holding back all night finally broke loose. I grabbed my coat and keys, not trusting myself to say another word. Margaret called my name, but I didn't turn back. The sound of her creaking followed me out the door, swallowed by the storm. Outside, the night was brutal, cold wind slicing across my face, snow swirling under the porch light. I got in the truck and drove without thinking, just moving just away. After 10 minutes of empty roads, I saw the neon sign glowing through the storm, the Silver Elk Tavern. A handful of trucks in the lot, country music leaking from inside, the smell of beer and old wood. The kind of place men go when they've got nowhere else to be. I found Frank at the bar, nursing a whiskey. He looked up, eyes narrowing beneath his worn ball cap. Well, I'll be damned. Denis Mallory on Christmas Eve. Don't tell me you're running from family dinner. Something like that, I muttered, dropping onto the stool beside him. He waved to the bartender. Get this man a double. I didn't argue you. For a while we sat in silence, the kind of silence only old friends know how to share. Then Frank turned, his cop instincts kicking in. You look like hell. What's going on? I took a long swallow, felt the burn crawl down my throat. Then I told him everything. The disappearances, the grave, the name on the stone, the ring. By the time I finished, his drink sat untouched. Michael Grayson, he repeated, tapping his fingers on the bar. That name rings a bell. He pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, then frowned. Hold on. He slid off his stool, disappearing into the back office. When he returned, he had a manila folder in hand, the kind cops keep long after cases go cold. Here, he said, tossing it onto the bar. That accident on Highway 14th, December 24th, 2007. Single fatality. Michael Grayson, 27. Car went off the road, burst into flames. The report called it an accident, but there were inconsistencies. What kind of inconsistencies, I asked. Impact marks on the rear bumper, Frank said, flipping the file open. Looked like he was hit from behind hard. But they couldn't prove it. No witnesses, no debris from another car. Case went cold. He paused, looking at me over the rim of his glass. You said Margaret told you her mother was in an accident that same night. Yeah, I said slowly. He raised an eyebrow. On Highway 14. The silence stretched between us. The bar noise faded, leaving only the faint hum of a jukebox and the storm outside. What are you saying, Frank? I asked. He shrugged. I'm not saying anything yet. But he took a slow sip of whiskey, eyes steady on mine. You ever wonder why she never told you about him? Why she visits the same grave every year, but lies about where she's going? I clenched my jaw. Because she loved him. Maybe, Frank said, lowering his voice. Or maybe it's not love she's hiding. I stared at him. What the hell do you mean? Frank leaned closer, his tone colder now. Denis, are you sure she's just mourning him? What if she's hiding something much darker? The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. I looked down at the file again. The photographs, the blackened wreckage, the line that read, rear-end collision, undetermined cause. And in that moment, for the first time since I'd met her, I realized there were parts of Margaret I had never known. Parts I might not want to. The clock on the dash glowed 12:17 a.m. by the time I turned onto Maple Creek Road. The storm had eased, but the world was still white and empty, a quiet graveyard of snow and light. I drove slow, the tires whispering over ice, my thoughts heavier than the night. Frank's words kept circling in my head like crows. Are you sure she's just mourning him? What if she's hiding something much darker? I'd left the bar with that sentence lodged in my chest like a shard of glass. The folder he showed me sat on the passenger seat. Copies of police photos, accident reports, the kind of paperwork that stains you once you've read it. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the house was dark except for the faint glow from the living room window. I sat in the truck for a moment, watching the candlelight flicker through the curtains, unsure if I wanted to go inside. But I did. The front door creaked as I pushed it open. Warm air met me, faintly sweet, faintly bitter. The kind of smell that reminded you something beautiful had once lived here. Margaret was asleep in the armchair by the fireplace. The candle beside her had burned halfway down its flame, trembling with every draft. Her hair had come loose, falling over her face. One hand rested on a book she hadn't been reading. The other clutched a folded blanket across her lap. For a moment, all I could do was stand there. This was the woman I'd loved for 15 years, who'd cooked for me, cared for me through hospital visits and layoffs, laughed beside me at the little things. The same woman who knelt at another man's grave every Christmas morning. I took a slow step closer. The floor creaked softly under my boots. She stirred, but didn't wake. Something in me softened then. Maybe it was habit, maybe pity. I reached for the blanket to tuck it around her shoulders. That's when I saw it, the corner of a folded envelope poking from the pocket of her gray coat, draped across the couch. It could have been anything. A receipt, a list. But I don't know, maybe instinct, maybe guilt. Something made me pull it free. It was old. The paper yellowed at the edges, creased, handled too many times. The handwriting on the front was hers, that neat, deliberate cursive I'd seen on every grocery note and birthday card. The address made my stomach twist. Attorney office, Michael Grayson Estate Settlement. My fingers skated around it. Estate settlement. My pulse started to race. I hesitated for half a second, then unfolded the letter. The ink had bled slightly from age, but the words were clear. To whom it may concern, I know this letter is long overdue. I can't live with the silence anymore. What happened that night on Highway 14 wasn't an accident. Michael was leaving me. He said he couldn't marry a woman who didn't trust him, that he needed space. I begged him to stay. We fought on the side of the road. He got in the car. I followed. I just wanted him to stop to listen, but he wouldn't. He kept driving faster and faster. I don't remember hitting the gas. I don't remember the impact. I only remember the sound of his brakes and the fire. I didn't mean for it to happen. God knows I didn't mean it. But I did this. And I've carried it every day since. Please make sure his family knows I loved him. Even if love is what destroyed us. Margaret. My hands were shaking before I even reached the end. I read it again slower this time, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the words didn't change. She killed him. Not by choice, not by malice, but still she did it. 15 years of secrets. 15 years of grief disguised as devotion. Every Christmas morning, she wasn't visiting a lost lover. She was visiting the man she'd accidentally killed. I staggered back a step, the floor creaking beneath me. My legs felt weak, my throat dry as sand. The letter slipped in my grip. My mind spun rewinding through the years, her absences, the shaking hands, the lies about her mother, the silence after every December morning. She wasn't just mourning. She was atoning. I looked at her again, asleep in that chair, the candlelight painting her face soft, peaceful, almost innocent. But now, all I could see was the woman from the letter, the one standing by a burning car, on a frozen highway, guilt etched into her soul. My breath came in uneven bursts. I didn't even realize the sound of the wind outside had shifted until I heard another softer, closer, a creak of floorboards behind me. I turned. Margaret was standing there, barely awake, eyes half open, confusion flickering across her face as she saw the letter in my hand. For a second, the world stopped. Her gaze dropped to the envelope, then back to me. The color drained from her face. "Denise," she whispered, voice hoarse with sleep and dread. I didn't speak. Couldn't. The letter trembled between my fingers, the candlelight flickering against the ink that damned her. Her lips parted, trembling. "You weren't supposed to read that." My throat tightened. "When were you going to tell me?" She didn't answer. Her eyes filled the tears, quick and hot. She took one slow step forward, shaking her head like a woman walking toward her own confession. And as the candle burned lower, her shadow stretched long across the floor, the shadow of a secret that had waited 15 years to be found. She didn't move for a long time, just stood there, pale, trembling, the candlelight shaking with every breath she took. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I wasn't going to send that letter. I wrote it years ago. I just couldn't." She stopped, covering her mouth. "I couldn't let it out into the world." I sat down slowly, still holding the letter. "Tell me everything, Margaret. No more lies." She looked at me, and I swear for a moment, I saw the girl she must have been, young, terrified, trying to hold together a world already falling apart. "It was 15 years ago," she began. "Christmas Eve 2007. Michael and I were supposed to get married that winter. We'd been planning it for months, but something had changed in him. He'd grown distant, cold. I thought it was nerves, but that night..." Her voice broke. "That night, he said he couldn't go through with it." The words hit the room like a hammer. He said I was too controlling, that he needed a clean start. He wanted to leave town, leave me. She swallowed hard, the sound catching in her throat. I begged him not to go. I followed him when he drove off. The snow was coming down in sheets. I could barely see the road, but I couldn't stop. I needed him to hear me, to see me, to take it back. She wiped her face with trembling hands. I flashed my headlights, honked, tried to make him pull over. He didn't. He just kept going faster. And I don't remember. She stopped, shaking her head. I don't remember turning the wheel. I just remember the sound. That awful metal tearing sound. His car spun out. It hit the guardrail. And then there was fear. The room went silent, except for the faint hiss of the candle. I ran to him, she said, barely breathing now. I tried to pull him out, but it was already too late. The flames were everywhere. I stood there screaming his name, and then I ran. I didn't know what else to do. Her hands covered her face, the sobs quiet but raw. The police found the car hours later. They called it an accident. I told them I was at home with my mother. They believed me. I stared at her. My pulse was a slow drum in my ears. You lied to the police. She nodded. I lied to everyone. I wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Everything inside me was twisting love, grief, anger, disbelief, a storm I couldn't control. She kept talking almost in a trance. After the funeral, I couldn't stay in town. Everyone knew me as the fiancée who lost her love. I moved away, tried to start over. That's when I met you, Denise. She looked up at me then, eyes searching mine. You were kind. You didn't ask questions. You saw someone broken and didn't try to fix her. You just stood there with me. I thought maybe that was enough. I leaned back, staring into the fire. The flames blurred, doubled, turned into headlights burning down a snow-covered road. Does Emily know? I asked. No, she said quickly. She was 12 when it happened. I told her Michael died in a storm. I told her it was fate. I wanted to feel anger, the kind that makes you shout, break something, walk away. But all I felt was the weight of it all. 15 years of trust, love, marriage built over a lie that had started with blood on the snow. My voice came out low. You didn't just marry me, Margaret. You buried yourself inside my life like a ghost trying to forget the grave you left behind. She flinched, but didn't deny it. I know, she whispered. Every Christmas morning I go there to beg for forgiveness, to tell him I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to betray you, Denise. I was trying to keep myself alive. I looked at her, really looked. For years I'd thought she was haunted by grief. I never realized the ghost was guilt. Outside, the wind howled through the eaves. Somewhere upstairs a floorboard creaked. Neither of us noticed at first. I should have told you, she said. Every year I meant to. But every year I was afraid you'd see me the way I saw myself. How's that? I asked. She looked straight into my eyes. As a killer. The word landed like ice water down my spine. Before I could answer, there was a faint gasp from the hallway. We both turned. Emily stood there at the bottom of the stairs, barefoot, pale eyes white in shock. She'd heard everything. Mom, her voice was thin, cracking. What did you just say? Margaret's face drained of color. Emily, you killed him, she whispered, stepping closer. You killed Michael. Margaret took a step forward, reaching out. It was an accident. Emily recoiled. You lied to the police, to me, my entire life. She looked at me, then tears streaking down her cheeks. You knew. I shook my head. Not until tonight. She turned away, pacing, running both hands through her hair. The lawyer in her was already fighting with the daughter. I could see it in her eyes. The part of her trained to seek justice warring against the part that just wanted to protect her mother. Margaret tried again, voice breaking. Emily, please. You don't understand what it's like to live with that kind of guilt. Emily snapped back, her tone suddenly sharp. I understand enough, Mom. I understand obstruction, lying to law enforcement, vehicular manslaughter. Her words caught in her throat. Do you know what happens if this comes out now, 15 years later? Margaret's eyes filled again. I don't care what happens to me. But Emily did. I could see it tearing her apart right there. Every legal instinct screaming, report it. Every drop of love saying don't. The silence that followed was unbearable. Margaret sank into the armchair, burying her face in her hands. Emily stood frozen, trembling, staring at her mother, as if she didn't recognize her anymore. And I just stood there between them, realizing the woman I'd loved for 15 years wasn't just grieving a lost fiancé. She was carrying the weight of a death she'd caused. I thought I had married a widow. But I'd really married a sinner running from the truth. Emily's voice broke the silence, soft but cold. I have to think about what to do. Margaret looked up, terrified. Please, Emily. But Emily didn't answer. She turned and walked slowly up the stairs, leaving us alone in the flickering candlelight, mother, husband, and the ghost that had finally come home. The morning broke gray and cold, the kind of light that makes everything look hollow, washed out, unforgiving. Snow still clung to the trees, heavy and unshaken, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I hadn't slept. The couch felt like stone under me, and the silence of the house was louder than any nightmare. Upstairs I could hear Emily's footsteps moving back and forth, steady, restless, the rhythm of a conscience at war with itself. When the knock came at the door, I already knew who it was. Frank stood on the porch, his breath fogging in the air, his uniform hat dusted with snow. Behind him, 2 patrol cars idled at the curb, their lights flashing red and blue against the morning white. The reflection painted the house in gilt. Morning, Denis, he said softly. We need to talk to Margaret. I didn't ask how he knew. I didn't have to. Anonymous tip, he added, lowering his voice. Came in last night. Email sent to the precinct. Attached were details of the Highway 14 case. Things only someone close could know. My chest tightened. I glanced up toward the second-floor hallway window. A shadow moved behind the curtain, slender still. Emily. She'd done it. Frank followed my gaze, sighed. She's a lawyer. Probably thought it was the right thing. The right thing, I murmured, my voice dry as this. Maybe it is. Margaret appeared behind me, then still in her robe, pale, her eyes hollow, but dry, the eyes of a woman who already knew the outcome. Morning, Frank, she said quietly. He took off his hat, his voice gentle but firm. Margaret, we need you to come down to the station. We just have a few questions about the old case. She nodded once. No protest, no confusion. Of course. When she turned to grab her coat, I saw her hands trembling. She tried to hide it, but after 15 years together, I could read the tremor like a heartbeat. I drove behind the patrol car, all the way to the county station, the same one where Frank and I had once played poker in the back office, laughing over cheap whiskey. Today it looked like a mausoleum. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, too bright for the kind of truth that belonged here. Frank led her into an interrogation room. I stayed in the hallway, leaning against the cold wall. Through the one-way glass, I could see her sitting at the metal table, small, fragile, like a ghost, trying to remember what it meant to be human. Frank set down a file, the same one he'd shown me at the bar. Margaret, he said gently, we're reopening the case of Michael Grayson. We just need your statement for the record. She nodded, hands clasped tight in front of her. He laid out the accident report, the photos, the twisted wreckage, the skid marks, frozen in black and white. Then he unfolded a newer sheet, a reconstruction diagram, the one I hadn't seen before. Even from the hall I could see the marks on the map, 2 sets of tire tracks converging, colliding. Impact points marked in red. Frank's voice was low, but steady. This shows contact between 2 vehicles before the crash. The original investigators ruled it inconclusive. No debris from a second car was found. Margaret stared at the paper for a long time. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Finally, she whispered, "It was me." Frank's pen froze above the page. "I hit him," she continued, her voice barely audible. "Not on purpose, I just wanted him to stop. But he wouldn't. He said he was leaving me. I lost control. I tried to save him. I swear I tried." Frank nodded slowly, eyes soft with pity, but duty holding them firmly. "And after the crash," she swallowed hard, "I ran. I told the police I wasn't there. They believed me." He wrote for a moment in silence. Then he slid the form toward her. "You'll need to sign this." Her hand hovered over the pen, shaking. For a second, I thought she might refuse. But then she took it slow, deliberate, and signed her name. Watching her through that glass, I felt something break inside me. This woman, the same one who'd smiled across 1,000 breakfasts, who'd tended my wounds, who'd held my hand through sickness, was now sitting under interrogation lights, confessing to a crime 15 years old. When it was done, Frank gathered the papers and stepped out. He found me standing there still as stone. "She told you everything I asked?" He nodded. "Everything." "What happens now?" he sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The DA'll decide. Vehicular manslaughter, lying to investigators, obstruction. Statute of limitations doesn't protect against confession. She might go to prison this time." I looked through the glass again. Margaret sat alone now, hands folded on the table, staring at the wall, not crying, not shaking, just empty. "She already has," I said quietly. "For 15 years. Frank didn't answer. He didn't have to. He put a hand on my shoulder, the kind of gesture men give when words won't help, and walked away. I stayed there a long time, staring through the glass at the woman I'd loved, realizing that the cell she'd built for herself was never made of steel or bars. It was made of guilt. And she'd been serving her sentence every Christmas morning, kneeling in the snow. December came again, as if the year had been holding its breath, just to return to this same frozen truth. Snow fell on the courthouse steps, slow and silent, covering the footprints of everyone who came to watch. Inside, the heat was dry and suffocating, the kind that couldn't melt the cold sitting in my chest. Margaret sat at the defense table, wearing a dark blue coat instead of prison orange, small mercy for a woman who'd already spent 15 years locked inside her own guilt. Her hair had gone whiter, her shoulders smaller. She looked less like my wife and more like a memory that hadn't realized it was fading. The judge, a stern man with kind eyes, shuffled papers on the bench. The prosecutor spoke first, clinical, detached, reading the facts like numbers on a report. Vehicular manslaughter, obstruction, false statements to law enforcement. Then her attorney stood, a public defender from Montpellier, too young to understand what it means to live under guilt for half a lifetime, and spoke about trauma, grief, and punishment without bars. I watched, my hands folded, my heartbeat slow but steady. Emily sat beside me in the gallery, her eyes rimmed red. She hadn't spoken much since that night. We both knew why we were here and what it had cost to get here. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost tired. Given the passage of time, the absence of intent, and the psychological toll evidenced by the defendant's long-standing guilt, this court sentences Margaret Mallory to 2 years probation with 5 years community supervision. The room exhaled as one. Margaret didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the news spread fast. In a small Vermont town, gossip moves quicker than snowmelt. Some called it mercy. Others called it failure. I overheard one man at the diner say, "She got away with murder." Another said she'd been punishing herself since the day it happened. And what more could a judge add to that? I didn't answer either of them. I stayed by her side through it all, not because our marriage still lived, but because compassion doesn't die with love. The vows had long faded, but duty, in its own strange way, remained. When she walked out of that courthouse, I was there. Not as a husband, not as a savior, just as a man who'd once promised her peace. That winter, I went to Michael Grayson's grave. The snow was deep, the trees still bowed low, and the wind carried the same quiet that had haunted me for years. I brought 3 bouquets of white roses, easies. One for Michael, for the life that ended too soon. One for Margaret, for the life she never stopped paying for. And one for myself, for the man who'd loved her, knowing he was never the only one. The cold bit at my fingers as I laid them down. The snow started to fall again, soft and slow, covering the flowers almost immediately. I stood there a long time, until my knees ached and my breath turned to frost in the air. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. It was Christmas again. When I turned to leave, Emily was waiting by the car. Her face was pale, her eyes tired in a way that didn't belong to someone her age. She walked up quietly. "I thought I'd find you here." I nodded. It's where things started, and where they keep ending. For a while she said nothing. Then softly, "I'm sorry." I looked at her at the same eyes her mother once had filled with the same ache. "For what?" "For turning her in," she said, her voice cracked. I thought I was doing the right thing. But every night since I hear her voice, I see her face when they took her away. I can't sleep, Denise. I ruined her life. I shook my head slowly. "No, Emily. You did what I couldn't." She looked up confused. "You told the truth," I said. "You did what I should have done the moment I found out. You didn't ruin her life. She already carried that ruin inside her. You just brought it to light." Her lips trembled. "Do you forgive me?" I reached out, took her hand gently. "I forgave you before you asked." We stood there together, two people bound by someone else's tragedy, listening to the wind whisper through the trees. Winter gave way to spring and spring to silence. Margaret kept mostly to herself, fulfilling her community work, quietly speaking little, sleeping often. Some nights, she'd sit by the window for hours just watching the snow fall, even when there wasn't any. Then one morning the following December, I woke to the sound of nothing, no humming in the kitchen, no clatter of cups, no soft voice greeting the dawn. I found her in the armchair by the fireplace, the same one where I'd first read her letter. Her hands folded, her breathing still. The candle beside her had burned out, sometime before sunrise. The doctor said it was a stroke, peaceful, quick. A week later, I received a small brown envelope with my name written in her handwriting. Inside was a short letter. "Denise, you once said forgiveness is the slowest kind of love. Maybe now you'll understand why I never stopped asking for it. If it's not too much to ask, I want to be buried beside him, not because I loved him more, but because that's where my story began, and maybe where it should end. Thank you for being the only man who ever stayed. Margaret." I folded the letter and sat there for a long time, listening to the house creak and settle around me. A month later, I honored her wish. The cemetery was covered in snow again, the same silent white that had watched over every truth between us. Now, two headstones stand side by side. His, hers. And each Christmas morning I bring 3 bouquets still. One for Michael, one for Margaret, and one for the part of me that finally learned love and forgiveness are sometimes the same thing. The world is quiet again. It's been 3 winters since Margaret passed, and the snow still falls the same way, soft, deliberate, like it's trying to cover what people can't. The cemetery sits on a small hill, just outside town, where the trees bend low, and the air smells like pine and old stone. Every December I make the same drive, an hour through frozen roads and silent fields, carrying the same white roses she once brought, wrapped in the same brown paper. The caretaker knows me now. He always nods when I arrive, then leaves me alone. Some silences aren't meant to be interrupted. Their graves sit side by side beneath an old oak tree, Michael Grayson and Margaret Mallory. The marble has started to weather, but the names are still clear, carved deep into the stone like truth that refused to fade. I kneel between them, brush the snow away, and place the flowers carefully. 3 bundles this time, not 2. One for her, one for him, and one for the man I used to be. I light a candle, shield it from the wind with my hands until the flame steadies. Its glow flickers across the stones, gold against gray. This candle, I whisper, is for truth, not for pain. For years I thought forgiveness meant erasing the past, sanding down the edges until they didn't cut anymore. But that's not it. You don't forget. You learn to live with what memory leaves behind. The snow keeps falling thicker now, covering the path behind me, softening everything, the graves, the flowers, even the sound of my own breath. I remember her last Christmas alive. She'd stood by this same spot, her coat too thin for the cold, her hair whipped by the wind, and said, "I just want peace, Denis." I think she finally found it. I used to wonder what kind of love binds the living to the dead. But now I know it's not love, not really. It's unfinished forgiveness. It's all the words we never said, the mercy we take too long to offer. I sit there for a long time, until the candle burns low, and the sky begins to turn gray-blue. My knees ache, my breath turns to clouds, but I don't move. There's no rush. When I finally stand, the snow has swallowed my footprints. The world looks untouched again, clean, quiet, new. I take one last look at the two graves. Their stones face east toward the rising sun. A small detail I asked for when they buried her, so that in some small way, they'd wake together. "Rest easy," I say softly. "Both of you." Then I turn and start walking back down the hill. Each step sinks deep into the snow, and the wind erases it just as fast. Behind me, the two graves fade into the white, two lives bound forever by tragedy, and the man who finally learned to let them go. There's no music, no grand farewell, just the sound of snow and a heart that's finally stopped looking backward. Maybe forgiveness isn't a miracle. Maybe it's just time, doing what time does, softening the sharp edges, melting the ice, leaving behind something that still hurts, but hurts less. As the cemetery disappears behind me, I realize the truth I'd spent half my life running from. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about finally being free. You know, people think revenge means hurting someone back. But after all these years, I've learned revenge can be quieter. It's waking up one morning realizing the pain no longer owns you. It's walking away from the grave, knowing you've finally said goodbye, not to them, but to the weight you've been carrying. I don't light that candle for sorrow anymore. I light it for truth, for peace, for the man I finally became after losing everything. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever loved someone who lied to you, don't waste your life chasing payback. Forgive, not for them, but for yourself. Tell me in the comments, do you believe forgiveness is a kind of revenge? Because for me, it was the only one that ever worked.